Three. Great. So this is Andy Revkin, and I am at the Earth Institute, Columbia University, although, of course, I'm not there physically. I'm at home, like everyone else here. This is the first kind of pub lunch we're doing in a series of posts I've been doing on how do we survive and thrive in an era where physical contact is the worst possible thing we want to do right now, and not mostly for our own sakes, but for the sakes of the least well among us, the elders and folks who have predispositions toward illness. It's going to be a rough ride these coming months, and I just feel it's important to step back once in a while and breathe. And along with that, we're all facing challenges, epic challenges right now. Industry is being disrupted, education being disrupted, healthcare completely disrupted, a certain lack of leadership in some circles, and then great leadership in other circles. And I wanted to start with like an homage to the first responders. Everyone, I guarantee you, everyone listening here, and my guests as well, have friends who are nurses or doctors or do patient care or are restocking shelves at the local market. And they are the heroes of this moment. It's not presidents, it's not communicators, it's people whose jobs take them to the front lines. And there's no front line. The front line is everywhere.
Yeah.
We're facing what I've been calling a microbial tsunami. And just like this, I wrote about a tsunami in 2004 in the Indian Ocean, and it disrupted everything, and here we go. But this is, we have an hour, and I want to kind of introduce my guests here, who are a wonderful array of creative communicators whose livelihoods are largely, significantly based on interacting directly with people. And so you're kind of like, we're all in the same boat in certain ways. So maybe we'll start with Irene O'Garden, who I've known since I moved to the Hudson Valley. I moved here in 1991. We met sometime in between in that first decade or so. And Irene is an essayist and a poet, and among other things has done this program up here for a long time called River of Words, where she inspires kids to go. She works with them out in the woods or down by the river, and they write and create. And Irene's a great communicator and educator. So Irene, give folks a little taste of what you do and then how your life is changing right now.
Well, it's funny. As a poet, there's essentially no difference because, as we know, poets are not raking in the dough in general. But as an educator, it's very sad to me that our program has been curtailed for the moment because we cannot be out there with the kids. But what I like to do, River of Words is a national program that was started by the poet Robert Haas. And it is in order to connect children with nature via poetry and art. And, 12 years ago, I was asked to be a poetry educator. I'd never really taught kids before. And so, of course, I was petrified because it's much easier to be with adults in a way because you feel they're going to get you. But kids are like, what are we doing here? So and I took to it right away because, of course, I'm a child at heart myself. So what I would do is go into a classroom. My kind of teaching is asking questions. Really, I come at the experience wanting to get responses from the kids. So, for example, if I teach a workshop called Tree and Me, I am asking them why we value trees. What is it that, and then we either have a piece of art that I encourage the children to do. In the case of the Tree and Me, we do a beautiful crayon drawing, and then we cover it with watercolor. And I have a spray bottle to wet the paper. And one of my favorite teaching moments is to go, this is the most precious liquid on earth. Can anybody tell me what it is? And they go, water. And I go, yes. And I said, and it's wonderful. And I spray myself in the face, and they love that. And then I go around and I spray them in the face if they like to have that. So there's a joyful spontaneity, but it also helps them connect with the outdoors. And sometimes they write poetry, sometimes not. So, but what's nice about this time period is that outdoors is still available to all of us. And if there is anybody listening with kids, please get them outdoors. Please get yourself outdoors in nature. Very, very healing at this time period.
And Jonathan, you're making a similar transition to thinking about the programs I've seen of yours are so hands-on, and you go into the woods sometimes with the kids, or you're doing Ichabod Crane, or one of the other great Hudson Valley characters, and there's something about having you in the room and prancing around that's kind of great. So how are you adjusting to this new life? You've been doing some Zooming and stuff, right?
Yes, I just began doing Zooming this week, and it was a really, daunting experience. But in the end, very heartwarming. I had a bunch of sixth graders listening to a retelling I did of the myth of the Minotaur, and I left them with trying to figure out a way to better vanquish the Minotaur instead of, as it happens, killing the monstrous creature. And the kids had great suggestions, like having them get struck with Cupid's arrow and falling in love with the Medusa. So but initially, what happened was, I guess it was about a week and a half ago, I was getting in the car to go to an engagement across the river, and I got a call that they had called it off, and I was rather shocked, even though I knew that the pandemic was on its way. But it was really disconcerting to be just sitting in the car and wondering, what do I do next? And then the whole house of cards kind of fell as one by one my public performances, and this is how I make my livelihood. I have very little in the way of, passive income, a few sales from books and CDs, but it isn't much. And, it was really heartbreaking. I kind of thought about going online, but was not equipped to do so. And, fortunately, my wife put out a plea to our community, and people have been, generous beyond all measure, to the point where I'm, I literally have been in tears thinking about it. But there still is this deep insecurity about these times. And as Andy, you were mentioning at the top, I know we have a very good friend who is, an emergency room nurse, and she's out all hours setting up tents for testing and waiting, of course, for the equipment to come in to test people. And, that's where the fears get directed. You just wonder how many people have this disease. How will we resist it? Will there be a huge death toll? And finally, I've been thinking a lot about a story by Leo Leone about a bunch of mice that gather together in the winter. And there's one who doesn't gather in seeds, but instead gathers in their stories. And even though you must know this one, and the other mice are really mad at this kind of story-bound mouse, but then when they really are starving and even, I think, dying, the mouse with the little stories begins to retell them. And at the very least, it eases the pain. And some of the mice even claim that that's what sustains them, is sharing the spoken word, as all three of us do. For I should include you too, Andy. The word, is sustaining. The community that we're creating right now for people viewing is sustaining as well.
Yeah, I have a graduate student intern, Brighton Kaoma from Zambia, who's a radio reporter background, even when he was a teenager. And right now he's brainstorming with the Radio Rookies program at WNYC to facilitate kids harvesting stories and telling them and saving them, also as sort of as a historic moment going forward. There's also a professor of sociology here, Seamus Khan, who's going to be teaching a course for kids on how to be a sociologist, essentially, how to look at the time right now and to harvest data and to do interviews in a way that will be there for the future. So Chuck, man, we have been together in many instances telling the word of science, and yes. So much of the communication challenge right now is cutting through the stuff that isn't scientific. And yet we both know that the behavioral sciences say that people we're so stuck sometimes on story that we ignore actual data. And I just wonder if you could just tell a little bit about how you're navigating this moment.
Absolutely. First, let me just say, Irene, I want to be one of your students. I just want to sit down by the river and experience that. And Jonathan, quite frankly, I would vanquish the Minotaur by inviting him over for tea with the Centaur. I think once the Minotaur and the Centaur sit down and get to know, and we'll just talk about why so angry, guys. Why so angry? Come on, guys. Yeah, a little Earl Grey and a powwow. We're gonna be fine.
There we go.
We're gonna be fine. Okay. But also very, very interestingly enough, let me just say that how wonderful it is that children's stories, and they're not really children's stories, they're, whether they're allegories or not, they serve a purpose other than entertaining children. But the story about the mice, it's wonderful when you think about how pragmatic, hardy, and resilient the children are. And when you listen to children's stories, and I'm not talking about the ones that we make up now. I'm not talking about Finding Nemo and I'm talking about classics. They tend to seem to be dark, and they tend to deal with issues that of grave adult importance.
Grim.
And grim. There you go. Grim. Yeah, that's it. And the reason is because, one, that's the way life was, and you had to deal with it. It was a reality. And two, children are totally capable of receiving information, processing it, and dealing with it. And I think at this time, Andy, what you were talking about with respect to communication, I think we need to be a bit more childlike in that our biases and our predilections to believe in certain things, that we kind of let that go and sit back and focus on the information that is truly important and edifying. Neil said the last time we were together, as we, once now we're not allowed to work together, but he said this will be a very interesting experiment as to whether or not people across the globe will listen to scientists. And I got to tell you, that is a very interesting experiment. I have a program that I'm efforting for climate crisis, and our motto is, at the start of every disaster film is a scientist being ignored.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is where we have to think. And, I think education, and you guys are educators. All three of you are educators. And I think we see now the importance of education and critical thinking. Critical thinking and education are so vital to our survival. And I think we never frame it in that way. We never frame it how critical thinking and education and the proper flow of information is vital to our very survival. And hopefully some of that will come out of this, hopefully.
What do you think of that? I mentioned about Seamus Khan having kids learn how to be a sociologist, in other words, which I think requires stepping back from thinking about how you're thinking. So it's like it forces you into sort of a story mode where you have a little awareness of your own sensibilities and how that might be a problem sometimes.
Yeah, I think that that's important, especially for kids. I think it's important for us Forget the kids. We need to step back and be sociologists.
Right.
When you look at the most disturbing thing that we've seen thus far, and I'm sure that there are people who are watching right now who hail from every facet of political leaning. So I don't want to point any fingers, okay? But when you look at the response of the kids and adults in Florida during spring break in the last several days, that will give you an idea of how important it is for us to step back and do exactly what you were talking about, because in doing so, it allows us to assess many different aspects of this problem. Not just, will I get a virus? What is my place in society? What is my responsibility to my fellow man? Who am I in relation to my neighbor?
Right.
How do my actions ripple across the pond of humanity and affect the other people with whom I share this little rock that's traveling at 17,000 miles per hour around the sun? Those are big questions, and we should be asking and answering them to ourselves daily.
So, Jonathan, in your initial Zooming, what have the kids been like? Have they, what's that vibe been like?
Well, they were a little bit tentative initially. They, I could tell that they've, of course, watched many things on screens, but some of them had seen me in their school, so it was a little bit peculiar just to catch me on the screen. And they primarily they just wanted the solace of something close to a live personal interaction. I found that when I would ask them little things, maybe to do a turn and talk, they were more hesitant than they may have been, say, in a classroom. But then they began to spring to life. Some of them, of course, would resort only to typing in a little, well, as in my mythology workshop way in which to deal with a minotaur. But they were, my sense was too that they were hungering for what the story could deliver. And, frankly, I was dubious. I thought that they were going to, be looking at me and thinking, let me watch an old rerun of SpongeBob SquarePants. Why are you watching this long-haired guy here trying to tell a story? But they, really honed in. And it, for me, it was really heartening to find them attentive and craving stories, even online.
That's great.
Well, I think that's a really, I was just going to say an important thing to remember, as whether we're talking about performing artists or creative artists. And by the way, there's something called Art Tree, isn't it? That's going around.
Tree, yeah.
Throw
what
some
is it
money
again?
that way. I think it's called Art Tree. It's a fundraising thing for artists, musicians, so forth. I'm not sure that's exactly the name of it, but I know that I did a donation. But I'm sure you can find other organizations that are really helping artists and poets and writers and comedians and our performers. We can support them that way, because guess what? Look around. Where are people turning in this time of crisis? They're listening to music. They are watching stories. They are watching comedians. They are reading poetry. This is the depth of what we have to offer as creators. And even if we're a little off, I'm not used to doing a whole bunch of Zoom things either, but I have some Zoom things set up for the next couple of weeks, because this is absolutely necessary for the human spirit, especially as we face these uncertain and really challenging times.
And there are these stories to look back on too. The Great Depression, the wars, obviously, even the 1918 epidemic, the Great Flood along the Mississippi in 1927, they produced a lot of art and a lot of storytelling, and it is part of our cohesion as a species to get through this through story. I guess that's it's been so interesting. I wonder what your feelings have been as you realized how big this story really is, like within the last week or so. Chuck, did you have a moment when this jumped from being, oh, it's like H1N1 or to, oh my God, this really is, we're living in one of those moments?
Yeah, I really am embarrassed to say the moment that it actually hit me, and that is I got sick over the weekend. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was the moment that the WHO declared it a pandemic officially. And that's very serious for them.
Yeah.
So if you ever follow this kind of stuff, you're like, whoa, like
Right.
They don't take that lightly,
Right.
And for something to meet the criteria and then for it to be announced so quickly. And it's like, the reason they do that is so you can get out ahead of it. Unfortunately, that did not happen. But, when I heard that, so I caught which turned out to be a cold, or at least we hope so. I'm still not at day 7, but my temperature never went above 99. So, or 99 point. So, I had a cold, and I really started thinking like, man, I was walking around still washing my hands and elbow bumping, but I didn't take it serious enough not to social distance. And I went to work on Saturday night. So, then when I woke up Sunday and I had pressure in my chest and I had a little bit of a cough, and I honestly thought to myself, dude, what is your problem? You come in contact with hundreds of people a night, and you still went to work.
Yeah.
So that's when it really hit me, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but I got to be honest, because I'm sure there were a lot of people feeling the same way. But go ahead.
I have a little. Oh, I was just going to say, I came down with a cold. I have talked to 3 or 4 other people who came down with a cold, and I'm referring to these as empathy colds. I think it's we're just processing a lot, and we are like going, all these people are having this challenge. So, and I think it's perfectly normal that you went to work, because we've been going to work with colds our whole lives. So,
Right.
but yeah, empathy takes so many forms.
Yeah.
And how has this affected you on the home front? Here we are spending a lot more time in the house with, if you have kids, your offspring, and if you don't, your spouse. And
Andy, as you know, I have young children. So
oh wow.
So how's that going?
Oh wow. Wow. Let me just say this, that Jonathan and Irene, I have a renewed, tremendous respect for the fact that you are able to deal with children in such a way that you inspire them and that you incite them to learning, and that you bring light into them, and that you don't carry a gun. And
oh, the poetry gun, yeah.
Shooting descriptive words.
Exactly. Yeah, it is tough. It's tough. And my little one, she said, I said, are you excited about school, being at home at school? And she said, this school, Dad, is the worst school ever. There's never. And I was like, what? And she was like, in the history of school, this is the worst school ever. So listen, man, you got to be really qualified. There's a special person that's a teacher. There's a special person that's able to interact with kids in such a way that it captures them. And Yeah, there's a reason why kids aren't allowed in nightclubs to see comedians.
Yeah, but Jonathan, don't you agree? We do get to go home. You know, you are there, and there are very special people who are parents who just say unconditionally, I'm here no matter what. And so we get to go like, hi, that was really fun. Bye.
That's true. Yeah.
So Jonathan, is there a little story that has come to mind? Are there any like little parables or that you've been telling?
A couple. There was one that I always used for years, and it's evolved. And very, very briefly, it concerns a child at a gathering who suddenly realizes that she's got to go and she's got to get home and tell her parents that what they expected is now coming to her. And she sets off and thinks she better take a shortcut through the woods. And then she realizes, oh, there's giants here. Oh, but that's just something big kids say to scare little kids like me. So she forges into the woods and indeed meets up with a big, mean, ugly, hold-your-nose, smelly giant who picks her up and threatens to turn her into a peanut butter and girl sandwich, and begins to stomp back to the castle. And a second giant meets the first giant and says, oh, you're going to share that girl, and I'll make a peanut butter and kid sandwich there. And then the king giant is bellowing, why were you in giant land? And she says, it's a secret. And when the giant bends down, one by one, she whispers into their ears, even though, I tell the kids one giant had mushrooms growing in his ears and the other had rutabagas and the third had crocodiles swimming around. But she frightens them off. And then she gets home, shares the secret with her parents. They don't get frightened. They just put her to bed. And then she wakes up and says, you want to know how you scare off the giants? Well, I told them the truth, that I'm sick with, and in the story, the chicken pox. And if you get too close to me, you'll grow feathers, go bark, 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 and then you'll lay an egg. And that's frightening the giants away. So I've been thinking about using that story as a way to emphasize to the children the necessity for social distancing, because no one wants to get sick. But I've also thought a lot about a story my grandmother told me about her father. One afternoon came home from work as a gardener and just said, make me some soup. I'm really sick. So she made some soup, and when she went to bring it into him, at first he was sleeping, and then she came back a few hours later, and lo, he was dead. He had died of the 1819 so-called Spanish flu. And just, he was in his late 50s, his lungs just filled up and was gone. So I, think about him being out in some situation, even as a gardener, and did not manage to avoid the disease. And even though, my wife and I are basically getting along, it's just very weird being confined all the time in this, lovely little prison here. So, so these are those are the two stories that have been, ruminating around in my head here.
And one thing I wanted to ask you each is a suggestion. My friend Jeremy Zallar, who I had on the first version, the first iteration of this webcast, he worked with me at the New York Times when I launched .earth, the blog. He's a blog designer, but then he went on to work in government at digital.gov, helping all the government websites be effective, connect with people. And he has a really good question that I've been asking people, which is, what is one thing you could do in the next day or two before next week that you personally could do that could tweak a needle 5% or even a couple of percent in terms of getting us through this? One thing I think about is that each of you has a skill that a kid or a teacher could learn a little bit of. But, when you think, what would be something that could amplify what you're doing or take this to a new place or the like? And while you were thinking of that, I don't want to immediately get you to answer that question, but I want to show you, let's see, which screen thing here. Oh, yeah. So a long time ago on .earth, my blog at the New York Times, I did some pieces on kids. What do we do with kids in the digital environment? You know, we're all like, everyone wanted to get them off screens back in the woods, which we do want to do. But you know, kids are implicitly hybrid organisms going forward. We all are. Here we are more and more on screens. And I did a post about my son, Jack, when he was young. He had my camcorder and we made a little film, and it was pretty cool. He saw some baby herons when we were visiting his grandparents. And when I wrote about that, a woman in Pennsylvania told this great story, which you can see over here, of when she was preparing dinner and wanted her toddler daughter just to stay busy. So she handed her her iPhone, and the daughter, she kind of thought the daughter would play like Angry Birds or some iPhone app game. And the daughter went out in the backyard and started making a documentary. Like you can see here, this was her documentary, and it was kind of a tour of her backyard. And in the soundtrack is kind of like David Attenborough. It's a kid's voice. It's like, and here's the prickly bush, which is the rose bush. And what I thought was so cool about that was that it was her instinct to tell a story visually. It was like not playing a game. It was to take her phone into the yard and make a story. So thinking about, you know, what can we do? Is there a little tool, a little tip, a little something related to being effective and being at a distance? What comes to mind? And don't worry, this is not a test, you know, because I don't know. Any thoughts?
I'm not sure.
Thought, but I want to save it till the end. Okay. I have one thought, but so you go ahead and I'll share this.
All right, Chuck, do you have a thought?
Yeah, well, you know, one thing that comes to mind is with respect to communication, especially for young people, and by that I mean not just little children, but you know, teenagers. So yesterday, my son and I were talking about hand washing, and he saw a video about hand washing, and he started telling me about how fascinating it was that a virus is basically, you know, this RNA packed inside of a little lipid casing, fat. And so when you wash it, the soap actually destroys the fat, and then you're also washing it off of your body. And those two things together are so cool. And then I said, well, that is also why alcohol, you know, whether it's like isopropyl or ethanol, it's like alcohol molecularly, what it does is it dries out the virus's casing so quickly that the virus just explodes. And then I went, well, I shouldn't say explodes because, and he went, oh, that would have been so cool. It would have been so cool if the virus. I just want to think, can I think of it that? And then he asked my permission because he knows I was trying to be scientifically, you know, correct, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, and Andy has seen me do this to scientists all the time, where I chide them for being so scientifically stringent and correct that you lose the message, right? Because you're not communicating to people the way they understand things. Yeah. And so I fell into that trap myself, and I couldn't believe it because I'm talking to a 14-year-old kid, and he's thinking about a virus exploding on his hand, you know? And so like, yo, that is so cool. Like, I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to use hand sanitizer because I'm bombing virus on my hand, right? And I stopped myself from going ahead and giving that kind of explanation. And then he said, hey, man, can I just think of it that way? I just want to think of it like that. And I went, oh, absolutely. And so I think that, you know, it's okay to go ahead and use the skills of communication in such a way where you may be slightly off scientifically, right, you know, but you're getting the message across and people understand. Like the best.
We have poetic license. You should have scientific license.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny. So Jonathan, when you do these programs, I think you do help kids envision how to tell their own stories, right?
Yes, that's the answer I would suggest, is to encourage the children to create their own stories. And it certainly can be making little garden tours to share. I mean, all of us are looking for content now, and imagine, if a child was to walk around with a cell phone and talk about what they're seeing, and maybe share that with a distant, relative or a grandparent, especially, that would be not just charming, but it would really provide, again, the solace, the comfort, what sustains us. Like I mentioned before in the Leo Leone story, is to share that story. I also thought that think people at home with children could, share little personal stories, like the one I shared about, my great grandfather in the 1918 flu epidemic. And I think what I've been thinking of too is how my day now has become one revolving not about going out to a school or a library to perform, but to sit here in front of the screen and share stories. This has a new reality about it. I'm excited, kind of. I find like, oh, I've got a little 12 o'clock viewing. I've got something at 4. Oh, wow, there's something happening. And that's been encouraging, and wanting, and also thinking of the joy I feel anticipating these times has helped break the, kind of this endless agony of just not knowing how long is this crisis going to occur? How long are we going to be sitting in our houses? Will the world, as Chicken Little predicted, suddenly crash in on us because we're not doing enough economically to sustain? But if your spirit is up through a story, a poem, a song, laughter, that's going to sustain us.
So Irene, you said you had a thought here too.
Okay, I do. I have a couple thousand thoughts about this, and probably the best thing I can do in the next day is write down all the thoughts that have been flooding me, especially this morning. First, let me say that the human race can do without a whole lot of things, but of course it has survived because it has the human race. So we still have the human race, and the connections between us that are happening are really important. I think the fact that we can only connect virtually right now is just nature's way of saying, okay, you guys were sitting behind your screens not connecting. We're going to let you know exactly what that means to not be in contact with human beings. And it's going to develop a real hunger in us for physical connection. So I think that's a really interesting thing that's going to be happening as a result of it. What my job is right now, I have a book coming out in May. It's called Glad to Be Human. And I have been thinking this way my whole life, and it hasn't been as popular as I think it's going to be. I am glad to be human. This is a book of essays, one of which won the Pushcart Prize. The last book, the last essay in the book is called Glad to Be Human. It's all these reasons I'm glad to be human, which still exist. Now, what I was gifted with this morning is the realization that, when you say Anthropocene, is that how you pronounce it, by the way?
Well, that's one of the funny things about it is it's such a new idea that we've entered an age of our own making. That's human. That the British say Anthropocene and we say Anthropocene. We haven't even figured out how to pronounce it yet.
Well, whatever it is, if it's the human time, I think we've gotten a whole lot of negative press, understandably, because there are all kinds of disruptions and there were all kinds of, but as human beings, there is so much to treasure in what we do. And I looked at, we're all kind of checking these headlines and going, ooh, recession, ooh, depression, oh, what is it? And I want to put out there a new definition of what this time period is. And instead of referring to it as the Great Depression or I think this is the period of the great compassion.
Ooh, I like that. Wow.
Because the thing that is already opening up in it is a flood of compassion, the likes of which the human race has never seen, because we've never been quite this connected before. And as we're going to witness suffering. Yes, we're already witnessing suffering, but we are going to witness the very most powerful response from human beings, because nobody wants this, and it's all over the world. We are realizing we have to respond with compassion. And so I really do have great hopes for this. I was thinking this the other day. I was thinking, good Lord, I'm looking around. It's like everything is melting. I mean, all of our systems are melting, whether it's business or school or whatever. And so I thought, well, all right, what's that? And I'm a poet, so of course I think in metaphor. And I went, well, it was only a couple of years ago in my work as an educator that I discovered that when a caterpillar goes into the chrysalis, first of all, the caterpillars, the larvae, consume, right? We're all familiar with that. So goes into the chrysalis and actually turns liquid. The caterpillar dissolves, it becomes liquid. All the parts for the butterfly are floating around in there, but it's still liquid for us at this juncture. But I honestly believe that what will arise in the human race will be something much more winged in consciousness. And I'm, it's tough. We have to go through this, but we will. I think compassion will bring us all the way through.
Wow.
Awesome.
That's
fantastic.
I love it. That is so super tweetable also.
Yeah.
I want to break this digital barrier and give you a big hug right now. You're just a few miles away, so I could cheat and do that.
I'll hug you.
What a rich, wonderful thought. You're also making, the other thing you said, I want to amplify a little bit, was when you said that nature is looking at us. We've all been on our screens, but when each of us thinks of most of what we do there, it's not really connecting. The systems we're surrounded by were programmed to stimulate us or aggravate us or validate us. And those are all passive. They're like receptive. They're not really conversation. They're not really connecting. So in a way, we're being forced to grow up a little bit around the real use of this system that we're, that's a big part of our lives already, but we haven't really adequately realized the power of it, I think, to connect. I mean, I'm feeling pretty emotional right now based on what you said, and you're not sitting next to me. So I don't know, Chuck and Jonathan, what do you feel about what was just said?
Well, I want to add to the story. It reminds me of something that I've often done with children, a little story about a reluctant caterpillar who emerges from the little egg and has all of these colorful companions, and together they enjoy devouring leaves and swinging on their silk threads. And then one by one, they begin to roll up into the leaves and to create the little chrysalis. But one is so enamored with being out and about, eating leaves and swinging, it's afraid to go into that state, into that kind of sequestered, if you will, quarantine state. And then it's the others breaking out with gloriously colorful wings, and they have got these incredibly long tongues. And as I do this, I'm having the children, and often they're very young, 3 or 4, act out the story. But then the story always needs a tension, a little bit of a conflict, and the others have to gather around this reluctant one and kind of take it step by step to roll into that again cocoon, and to let that liquefication. I too, as a storyteller, when I learned that's what literally happens, oh man, agonizing. Like,
it's so
how
good,
could that possibly physically be? There's someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson who can explain it. But we need that little bit of encouragement to go into what we're into now, in order to, maybe we're going to liquefy, and then we're going to all emerge into this era of great compassion as, the butterfly that we're really meant to be, where we can, visit flowers and sustain each other, in part by our flight and our beauty.
Wow.
Nice. Yeah.
I think we're giving caterpillars a bad rap here.
I want to come see you. I want to see your act.
No, I just love hearing what you guys saying. I mean, it's as a comedian, we tend to be observers, but we also tend to be a bit more cynical, where we should be skeptical. Cynicism tends to take root where healthy skepticism should be. And that's just an occupational hazard. But hearing you guys talk, I have to say, inspires me. So that's a great thing. I mean, that's a great thing. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I think also, too, we have been using the connection of electronic meetings, social media, screens as a means of averting our gaze to another human being.
Hey, this is good. You got to make a little song out of that little rap.
So I think we've been hiding. So behind that. Now, here's what's happening right now, and it's we're in week 1 of this.
Yeah.
And you're already seeing people with the need to get on the screen, not as a means of escape, not as a means of disconnection, not as a means of, I don't want to be around another person, let me do, but as a means of like, hey man, I need to talk to somebody. Hey man, I actually do need you. I actually do need you. Yeah. And so maybe what will happen after that is that realization of the need may translate into a greater physical connection with one another when this is over. Maybe. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
The great compassion and the great connection.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I want to show something in a minute. Here on my .earth blog, way back when, I was getting kind of fed up with comments as they existed. Any of you online, that comments can be most of the time it's because you don't really feel the person there. So it's really easy to just write words that are really mean and stupid. And I started trying some experiments. Let me see if I can show you this and see if this works. One of them was one day I realized that in the comment kind of area on my blog, you could embed a YouTube player, the little screen.
Oh, yeah.
And so I said to my readers one day, I said, hey, post a little video clip on YouTube, and just as a greeting to other .earth commenters, and create a community here. And the first one came from this woman, Wang Suya, she was living in Tokyo, but she's Chinese. But I'm just going to show it to you, and I'm not sure if you can hear it, but I'll say. She says, I'm Wang Suya. I'm here in Japan to say greetings to you. She's saying thank you to the other comment contributors on the blog, and it was hard to make it catch on as like the norm. And I kept thinking, man, this is like those newspapers in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
The newspaper where it's like actual people.
Right.
And a bunch of my readers did do that. And, it didn't last long enough to become the norm, but it demonstrated to me that you can create community on this internet thing. And I would give you one more example from .earth, which was that at a certain moment, a bunch of my readers decided to self-organize a field trip to New York City. So these are people who never would have met each other except through this blog thing. One was in Boston, one came from Madison, Wisconsin. They said they were going to come to New York and meet each other, even if I didn't want to meet them. So, and I brought him up to the office. There's a picture online somewhere of me with it was about half a dozen of my readers, and I thought, wow, there really is a way to build an actual community using these interfaces. And the other thing I think about that's so exciting, those of us adjusting away from that one-on-one experience, you have a global opportunity now. You could connect with a reader anywhere in the world who has a mobile phone and some internet activity. And there's still places where that's not the case, but it's just wonderful to see what's possible. So it's not all like a negative adjustment. And I think, Jonathan, you kind of implied that a little bit when you were talking a few minutes ago, that you're getting the realization this is an adventure, not just a chore. So what do you all think? And in the world of comedy, I don't know. Well, actually, Colbert is now doing his show out of his backyard. I saw the other day.
Yeah.
And bathtub, yes.
I didn't see that one. I didn't see that one. So what is there a way to kind of convince us all? We'll always want to get outside and we'll always want to stand in a circle and talk to each other. But do you feel that it's possible to make this less seem like a chore and more like an adventure, or is that like fantasy? Long silence.
Is that for Jonathan or me?
That's for any of you.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was for Chuck.
I'm sorry, I didn't cue it up right, but
my philosophy, Andy, which is, and this is backed up scientifically, so it's just not me making conjecture. But when people laugh, they are far more likely to connect with whatever subject that they're laughing about. They're far more likely to remember the information that they receive, and they are disarmed, which means even if they don't agree with what's being said, they're far more likely to listen to it.
Right.
And that opens up discourse, because we're never all going to agree on the same thing. First of all, that would be boring. That would be. I have a friend, Bob. He throws dinner parties and he invites people from all different backgrounds purposely to get them in a room so that there's some tension. Like, that's his whole thing. And
that's great.
And so he had the party, and we all started talking. And about 6 minutes into the conversation, he went, "Well, clearly I didn't cast this party correctly. Everybody's agreeing with one another. This is boring. Sucks." And it's because, the people that he invites are fully capable of disagreeing and still holding a civil discourse. And I think that comedy helps you do that as well. Because when you're laughing, you're disarmed. When you're disarmed, you're far more willing to listen to the other side. So that's the way I feel about that.
Cool. That's a great point.
May I chime in? It just created a little, the idea of your friend Bob having a dinner party where there's a tension reminds me of how in a story you need some kind of attention. I always tell the kids 1 cup of a big problem to dollop out there, and then different ways to try to solve it. But these times are also, to use another analogy, rather like the oyster. We have now the grain of sand irritating all of us, and got to keep both sides of the shell up around us as we're in this kind of shutdown. But eventually it's going to create a beautiful pearl we can share and make it.
I think that last thought is so important. I've been talking with some others here at a very high level, a very serious level. These are people who do national security strategy. One of the issues we have right now is that there's a bunch of stuff that I call the now stuff. The now stuff is like getting masks to the people who need them. Getting kids off of beaches who are idiots. The next stuff is there's this huge flood of money that's going to come pouring, and the question is, does the rebuilding, or not just getting through the moment, but as we start to focus on what comes next, that can take 2 very different shapes. It can rebuild just what we've already had. We can just slide back into our old modes, or it can create true resilience. It can create a more connected, cohesive communities. And the problem we have is that a lot of the ways we invest money or don't go to storytelling, whether it's even the WHO, the World Health Organization, from what I understand, they have one person tracking social media around this.
Yes.
In the whole,
wow.
In the whole organization.
I've got to double check, but even if it's 2, even if it's 5.
Oh my God.
Well,
there are a lot of unemployed people right now.
I know. So it's like, we're so underinvested in managing story, meaning this global story. If no one is out there cutting through the noise and at least creating the opportunity, like, as Chuck was describing, for humor to engage and take people down a path toward some common goal, then we very likely will just fall into our old patterns again, or not. So that's a really big, important, momentous part of the question, even as we grapple with the granular now stuff. I don't know how that makes sense.
I think it's all getting so grassrootsy because there's no option. There's no other option than this blade connected with this blade, with this blade, with this blade. And again, when this idea of the great compassion came to me, I thought, let us not refer to this in any kind of financial way, what's happening now. I mean, there will be people who do that, but let us begin as human beings to think of it in not those terms. I know there will be challenges, but there will be compassion that rises up for them. And I also have to say, because my agent would kick me if I didn't, pre-order Glad to Be Human. It's coming out on May 19th. And if you like these thoughts, you will find plenty of them in there, although it preceded this remarkable challenge, remarkable set of challenges. And yet I also feel, as I'm sure you do, Jonathan, and you, Chuck, and you too, Andy, there are certain of us that get information intuitively before it's really called for. And then all of a sudden, bingo. And I feel like there are so many people around the world right now who have done all kinds of preparation, spiritually, emotionally, creatively, that have been sort of in training for this moment.
Right.
And I just connect with each and every one of them and of the people who are now finding new creativity, because that is the thing that gets human beings continues human beings. That's what continues human beings, is our connection, our creativity, and our ingenuity.
So we're at the end of an hour here, and I'd love each of you, if you could think of a few words that get back to Jeremy Zollar's question about nudging a needle 5% today or tomorrow or next week. It feels like we're on a path here towards something cool. This conversation has been really rich, and it's a lot of it is about story sharing as much as storytelling. Even though you're mostly people who grew up professionally or otherwise is in a sort of expository way. A lot of what you're talking about is interactive. It's the word I keep thinking lately, and I hadn't thought about this till a few years ago. The word communication at its root is communing. It's about sharing information. It's sharing stories. It's that dinner party that Chuck talked about, where people you design a conversation. There's a guy here at Columbia University who runs a difficult conversations laboratory.
Right.
Peter Coleman.
Does he have guest speakers? Could we send certain relatives or?
So my takeaway is a lot of what you're talking about is a shift from storytelling as we knew it to enabling, empowering story sharing and true absorption of stories and respect for other people's storylines, and with common goals in mind. That one of the other last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm just so excited about this conversation. Puck Mickleby, who's a retired colonel in the Marine Corps, who advised the Joint Chiefs of Staff back in 2009 on how to have a new grand strategy for the 21st century, not like what we had. It was all about everything you've been talking about. And he said in the military, we don't really know this so much outside, that oh, that was interesting.
Huh?
At least in the Marine Corps,
It was censored.
you're given an order, but you're also given a purpose, meaning the reason for the order. It's not just go dig that well.
Yeah.
And he said it's purpose with a capital P that always has to be in the foreground, because purpose is what allows enough plasticity that you can adapt and be agile and think a little bit. You're not just going in a straight line. And I love this conversation for that reason. So just a quick Chuck and Jonathan, any last sort of go forth kind of words to your minions here?
I say based on this conversation, keep it real, keep it positive. Let's focus on that. Like, that can be a conscious effort on our behalf, like to actually foster and promote positivity in the face of peril. And I think, I think that's a good thing.
Well, I would echo that. I love that, positivity in the face of peril. It sounds like a great title for a tale that maybe we could share of how in the past maybe we've done that, or maybe people could share examples from others of how they've been able to go forth positively in a time of peril. So I would, again, wholeheartedly recommend that people share stories of that nature.
Great. Well, thank you. Oh, sorry, Irene.
Oh no, I was just going to say. Think about what makes you glad to be human, and share that with somebody. Just share that. You can share that on my Facebook page. Share it somewhere, so that we all get that feeling. And I'll give you just one little line from a poem of mine, which was about the tsunami that you mentioned earlier. And it's the last line that says, "We're not made of matter, but of mattering." So.
Beautiful.
That is great.
Yeah, that's great.
Matter is a verb. Matter.
Yeah.
Matter is this microphone, but it's a verb. Matter. Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you all for being part of Sustain What? This is a Columbia University Earth Institute experiment in storytelling that I kind of cobbled together last Sunday. And this is number 5, I think. And I hope there'll be 50 or 100 more. And I hope that people listening in will comment on the archived version of the video and let us know what to do next. And it's time to walk a dog. And sustain this is my closing line for Sustain What. Thank you again. We'll be let's do this again. Let's do this again sometime.
I love it.
Absolutely.
And face to face in the end. We'll do it.
Yes.
When the clouds have cleared. All right. We love you. Take care.
Right. Thanks.
Take care. Too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.